everyone, it's Hailey, and today is Bookmas Day 9, so I'm going to be talking about the worst books that I read this year, according to Goodreads. Missed it, yesterday for Bookmas Day 8, I did this same sort of video, except with the best books that I read this year according to Goodreads. So I essentially went to my Goodreads, looked at the books that I've read this year, and ordered them from like highest average rating to lowest average rating, and talked about the top 10. And it was really interesting, actually. But today I think is going to be even more interesting, because I actually have like no idea what books other people didn't like that I read this year. And I mean, I know at least one because of a video that I was planning before, but I still think it's gonna be interesting. So essentially, these are the books with like the lowest average rating. So it doesn't mean they're bad books. Once again, like if you loved them, don't feel bad about it. It just means that they just have a kind of low rating. Like most other people, not most, I shouldn't say that. Some other people didn't enjoy them, even though maybe I did, or maybe I didn't as well. I don't really know yet. Before we get into the list, don't forget to click that subscribe button and then click the bell icon so you'll be notified whenever I post. I'm posting a new video every single day for the entire month of December, so you don't want to miss any of those. But let's get to seeing what the worst books that I read this year were according to Goodreads. I mentioned this yesterday, but just a reminder that like these average ratings are constantly changing. When, you know, whenever anyone else adds their star rating, it's constantly in flux. So this is just like at the time of me filming this video where things are at. So the lowest rated book, or the worst book that I read this year according to Goodreads, is the one that I was talking about that I knew was going to show up on here, but that is Alice by Heart by Stephen Sater, which has 416 ratings, so really not all that many, but it has a 3.06 average rating out of 5 stars, which it's quite low. Pretty much anything like below a 3.4 is pretty like significantly low. I actually liked this one. I was very skeptical going into it because I knew that the rating was very low. I was going to do a video, and I just haven't done it yet, but I probably still will, but I was going to do a reading vlog where I read the lowest rated books on my TBR. So I knew that this one had a very low rating because it had that like when I was going to go and film that video. So it wasn't a surprise to me, but what was surprising was that I did actually like it. This is like a World War II story, but it's also mixed with an Alice in Wonderland retelling. It's definitely different, and I can see why people wouldn't like it, because I tried physically reading the book and I was not liking it. Like I wasn't a fan of it, but when I listened to the audiobook, I actually quite enjoyed the audiobook. So I can understand when reading it, it was very dense and slow. And I mean, if that's how most people were like consuming the story, that makes sense to me. So kind of getting to some of the lower rated reviews. So this one has a 2 out of 5 stars, and it says, if you've read this but haven't listened to the musical, do yourself a favor and listen to it ASAP. The musical is much better. Now I actually haven't listened to the musical yet, but I probably should. I want to see if I can find a 1-star review here. Like most people gave it a 3. So it's not all that bad. There is a 1-star here. Okay. Really didn't like this book. I found it very confusing, the jumping back and forth from reality to fantasy. Did not finish reading it. That's fair. It looks like lots of people actually didn't even end up finishing it. They just found it very confusing. I can see that. The second worst book that I read this year according to Goodreads is Acts of Service by Lillian Fishman. I had seen so many 5 out of 5 star reviews for this book, and it had kind of like, I don't know, the cover stuck out to me for whatever reason, but after reading Otessa Moshfegh, I was kind of looking for something similar, like to see if I might like it. I don't know, for some reason this one just intrigued me, but this one has about 4,000 ratings, a little bit more than that, and it has an average rating of 3.17 out of 5 stars. This is definitely like a very different read. It's also a book that doesn't use quotation marks for conversation, which I know is very controversial. I don't know why it does that, but it's whatever. I included this on my like didn't really like it video for this year. I wasn't a huge fan of it either. I can really understand why people wouldn't like this book. It deals with sex and sexuality, and the reason that I understand why people wouldn't like it is because of the relationship, like the fact that it's basically two women who are obsessed with this man who is like very toxic. It's extremely problematic. I'm not saying that like a polyamorous relationship is problematic, but the way that this one was, ugh. So one of the 2 out of 5 star reviews says that it was a frustrating reading experience. The main problem they had was that the questions it raised were the ones that they were invested in conversations they wanted to see more of in literature. But while there were glimmers of insight and memorable lines, those didn't feel worth reading a whole guy about 2 women idolizing this insufferable guy. And that's fair. Like, there definitely were a lot of questions brought up, a lot of interesting discussions. I didn't think that it was really successful in the way that it dealt with those. It's very much like a lit fic story, which I can see like a lot of people enjoying, but I can also see it not being up a lot of people's alley, and really like kind of mine included. The 3rd worst book that I read this year, according to Goodreads, is Blame It on the Mistletoe by Beth Garrett. I read this last like Christmas for Bookmas, and this one has 1,700 ratings, and it has an average rating of 3.41. I don't know if I actually ended up finishing this one or if I DNF'd it. I must have finished it, but I was not a fan of this one either, obviously. So I do agree with this one. It was just, I don't know. It was essentially like kind of a swap story, sort of like think The Holiday, where you have 2 characters. One of them is like an influencer living in, I think it's Los Angeles probably, if I had to guess. I don't even remember. The other one's living in the UK, and then they end up swapping. So like pretty much exactly like The Holiday. But it was just like a caricature of influencers. It felt really immature and silly, and yeah, I didn't really like it. Once again, I have a 2 out of 5 star review here, and this one says, I don't know why I thought this was going to be a Hallmark movie. Instead, I got a YA novel with a lot of caps lock, Twitter posts, and a social media war. Pausing for now, and maybe next holiday season I'll pick it up and enjoy it more. Okay, so they DNF'd it, but it really was like, it just, sometimes I'll read YA books and it feels like an adult trying to understand what a teenager is, but like in the way where it's really corny, if that makes sense. Like, it's not actually what teenagers are like at all. It's very much like a caricature. And yeah, that was definitely the case with that one. The 4th worst book that I read this year, according to Goodreads, is For All Time by Shanna Miles, which had 588 ratings. So once again, not very many. And it has an average rating of 3.47 out of 5 stars. I actually ended up DNFing this one. I got like 65% of the way through, and I didn't click with the writing. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but I wished I loved this one because I thought the concept sounded amazing, but apparently I wasn't the only one who had an issue. It's really so tragic because like it seemed like such a great book. So this review has 2 out of 5 stars as well, and it says, I don't know much to say about this book except I was just bored. I didn't feel connected to the characters. I didn't have any feelings towards them in terms of romance, and the time jumping was written in a way where it was a little confusing. I will agree with that. Like I said, I ended up DNFing it, but the writing was very confusing because it's essentially about 2 characters who, like, throughout different lifetimes, they constantly are meeting and falling in love. They're like destined to do that. But I felt like the execution of that storyline was so weird, and like it made it so I couldn't finish it because it was really hard to get into. The 5th worst book that I read this year, according to Goodreads, is You Can Go Your Own Way by Eric Smith. I found this one was just okay. I didn't really have like particular feelings either way, but this one has 1,000 ratings and it has an average rating of 3.47 out of 5 stars. It was like, I don't know, it was just kind of okay. Like, that's honestly all I can think of to describe it. And I had read another book by this author last year that I really liked, so I think that's why it was kind of a little bit of a letdown for me. But I wanted it to be more like it was a super cute, cozy, you know, sort of read, but it just kind of didn't quite get there. So I have a 1 out of 5 star review here, and this one says that like the pacing is extremely weird for it, which I guess I kind of remember it being a little bit strange, but essentially they said that they had so many expectations and then all of them crashed onto the floor while reading this. I don't think this was a bad book. I think it was just fine. It wasn't really memorable. It was just kind of okay. I can't really pinpoint anything that was wrong with it. It was just like fine. It's actually kind of funny because literally what I'm looking at on the screen right now is very similar to what my like worst books of the year video was. So kind of funny, but By a Charm and a Curse by Jamie Questel is, I think we're at the 6th worst book of the year that I read according to Goodreads. And this one has 667 ratings and it has an average rating of 3.48. I DNF'd this one, but I can definitely see, obviously because I DNF'd it, like why people wouldn't have enjoyed this one. This review has a 2 out of 5 star rating and they kind of list like things they liked but then things they didn't like. I'll focus on the didn't like because that is kind of what I'm focusing on today. But they said that they feel that the story was just weak overall. They didn't love how the curse transfer happened in the beginning of the story and they didn't connect to any of the characters. Everything was happening so quickly that they didn't have time to get into the setting of the story and they thought the resolution was underwhelming. I did agree, like definitely the curse transfer was meh, and then it also, the follow from that, I just thought that the character was like fine with it way too quickly and that annoyed me a lot. The 7th worst book that I read this year according to Goodreads is Four Aunties and a Wedding by Jessie Q. Sutanto, and I'm so sad to see this on here because I was also really sad that I didn't like this one since I enjoyed Dial A for Aunties so much. This has 13,000 ratings and it has an average rating of 3.49 out of 5 stars. So this review says, I'm so confused because I gave the first one 5 stars and this one was just so boring to me, and this one is 2 out of 5 stars, the rating. That was a really confusing way to do that, but you get it. But yeah, that's exactly how I felt. Like, not that I was bored so much, but that I was just really frustrated with what was happening. Like, I enjoyed the first book so much, and this one, I just felt like it undid a lot of it. This review is 1 out of 5 stars actually, and it says, as a proud owner of 4 editions of Dial A for Aunties, no one is more disappointed by my less than stellar experience with the sequel than me. So they say that Four Aunties and a Wedding failed to deliver the same charm, feel-good antics, and laugh-out-loud humor that the first book had in spades, and I completely agree with that. Like, everything about this. Yes, I definitely agree with this review. I think this review like completely encompasses everything that I was feeling personally as well. I kind of lost track of what number we were at, but I think that we are at number 8 as far as like the worst books of the year. So the 8th worst book of the year according to Goodreads is The Holiday Switch by Tiff Marcello. This has a 3.49 out of 5 star rating and it's based on 4,600 ratings. I DNF'd this one as well, just wasn't really a fan of it, and kind of similarly to like Blame It on the Mistletoe, I can understand why, because I feel like with like Christmassy sort of romance reads, I can take more levels of corniness than I normally would with other books, but this one just didn't hit the mark for me. This one has like a lot of 3 out of 5 star ratings. I'm kind of even struggling to find anything other than that, but basically just saying the same thing where it's just kind of like, okay. The 9th worst book that I read this year according to Goodreads is Royal Holiday by Jasmine Galori. Once again, DNF'd this one actually. Wasn't a huge fan of it, but I'd be curious to see like what other people are saying. Okay, so this rating is like a 2.5 out of 5 stars, and they say, probably the weakest book in the series so far. All the British characters read like they're written by an American because they come across as a stereotype, but also frequently use the North American English rather than the British English terms for things. Also, Malcolm lacked personality. Yes, I do agree with that. It was just kind of lacking personality in general. This review is 2 out of 5 stars, and it says that they were disappointed. They thought it would be a super holiday infused romance that was a blast to read, but that wasn't what they got. Like, it wasn't as holiday focused as they were expecting, and the writing was the main issue. And I definitely agree. Like, they say that the conversations that happened in this book felt very immature, and yeah, that was exactly how I kind of felt in the beginning. I felt like I was being told a lot of things and not shown, and also being told in a very like juvenile way, like very plain terms. Since this list featured like so many books that I included on my worst books, I'm going to mention like a few more than I did in, like, I did the top 10 for yesterday's video, but I'm gonna talk about a few more. So next is The Project by Courtney Summers, which has a 3.52 average rating and it has 12,000 ratings. I also wasn't really a fan of this one either. as you guys know, but I did kind of know going into that one that the general consensus was quite a few people were like underwhelmed by it. Lots of people just saying that this one was kind of boring and their expectations were pretty high, but it wasn't exactly what they had been anticipating. I'm kind of sad by these like next three because I actually really liked them. So We Can't Keep Meeting Like This by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This has 7,000 ratings and it has an average rating of 3.58 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed this one. It wasn't my favorite by Rachel Lynn Solomon, but I didn't like dislike it. It looks like the review is that like, this review is actually quite brutal, but they just found the story really irritating, which I guess like fair. I don't know. I thought it was fine. Next is The Summer Job by Lizzie Dent, which has 12,000 ratings and it has an average rating of 3.59 out of 5 stars. I can get why this one is like rated lower because the main character can be kind of frustrating. She finds herself in a situation that's like really sticky and you just want her to kind of like tell people the truth, so it can be definitely irritating, but I enjoyed this one personally. But yeah, like I expected, this person has a 1 out of 5 star rating and they say this book was painful to read, literally painful. Birdie was the most unlikable main character I've ever read in a romance novel. Every decision she made was the worst possible thing she could have done, and she doesn't even get better as the book progresses. Like, yeah, you're not wrong. She definitely did make some really interesting decisions that I don't think I would recommend, but I had a good time reading it. And the last book that I'll talk about is The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa, although it's really interesting, like scrolling through this list. Christmas reads always very controversial in terms of their rating, and even like Guilt by Catherine Longshore, which I quite enjoyed, that's on here as well. But anyways, The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa is the last one that I'm going to talk about. This has 51,000 ratings and it has an average rating of 3.59 out of 5 stars. So this is an enemies to lovers romance, and I'm not like a huge fan of enemies to lovers, but I think that's why I liked this one. Like, now I'm remembering that the angst of it and the enemies part didn't last very long, so I can see people who love enemies to lovers and are looking forward to that part of it being kind of let down and disappointed when the angst is like very brief. So this 2 out of 5 star review says, wooden dialogue, unlikable characters, childish hijinks, and a romance that didn't land. Yeah, there was nothing about this one that I liked at all. It's like, that's fine. I had a good time with reading it, and I do think like a lot of people would probably enjoy it too. Okay, so those are all of the worst books that I read this year according to Goodreads. I think this is so interesting to do and I really enjoy doing this video. I might do it for like years past. I don't know, might be interesting. Let me know if you would like me to do that. But thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Tomorrow for Bookmas Day 10, we are going to still be talking about Goodreads. This is going to be like the last video where we're talking about Goodreads, but I'm going to be looking at some negative reviews for my personal like top 5 favorite books of 2022 that I read this year, and looking at some negative reviews and everything, you know, seeing how people hated, like why people hated the books that I loved this year. Could be interesting. So I will see you with that video tomorrow. Bye!